Welcome to the Bush Bee Man experience on learning about bees, the basic things that you need to know. You're in the right place. So if you've talked to your partner about becoming a beekeeper and they haven't been able to talk you out of it, you're in the right place to find out what you need to do. So let's have a look. So one would assume you've been thinking about keeping some bees for a while now, and you're on the right track. It's not for everybody, but hell, when you get involved, you're gonna love it. There's only so many hobbies that you can get involved with that involve somewhere between 60,000 and 100,000 little creatures relying on your every move. So you're in the right place to make sure they can stay alive and you can be a good, successful beekeeper. Because you know what, there's more involved with this than just putting them in your yard and walking away and coming back and getting some honey. So here we go, we're going to have a bit of a walkthrough for you. I think the interesting thing is all the public speaking I've done, and I ask a few questions and I say, what do you think of when you think of honeybees? And what the first thing that pops into your head is, of course, you think of honey. And the next thing you think about is the time you trod on one and it stung you on the foot or stung you on the nose or wherever the heck it stung you. So people associate beekeeping with getting stung and eating honey. And that's not too far from the truth. But the good news is that after a little while you get relaxed about getting a sting, and plus you get to wear a bee suit, you get to wear some gloves, and so you don't actually need to be afraid. And the cool thing about bees is after you work with them for a little while, the fear dissipates and you learn to fall in love with them. And you know what, the occasional bee sting is normally your fault because you picked the frame up the wrong way, or you didn't do your zip up on your suit properly, and they actually don't want to sting you. It's not in their best interest. And I'm sure when you start becoming a beekeeper, then you start noticing them in the garden and on a tree and everywhere. They're all around us all the time. So if they were actually aggressive little critters that wanted to sting you, hell, we'd all be covered. My friends at the Flow Hive show, they make it look like there's not a lot involved with being a beekeeper, and there's not a lot involved with the way they harvest the honey, but there's still a bit of management going on in the bee box. So that we have, in a beehive, you have the honey super, whether that be a flow hive super or whether it be an old-fashioned frames. Then you have the brood box at the bottom. Now the brood box is the working place that we beekeepers spend a lot of time in that box. Well, probably not as much time as you would imagine, but when we do our inspections, that's the box that's very important to us, because we want to make sure when we go in, look in the brood box, and usually you've got a brood box that's got 10 frames, sometimes there's 8, but as a general rule, it's 10. And the outside 2 frames, you'll generally have honey. The next 2 frames in will be a mixture of honey and pollen, generally speaking. And the middle 5 or so will be where the brood is. It'll be in a little ball, and that's where all the action happens. And you want to make sure that you've got some little eggs, and you've got some little white larvae, and you've got some capped brood that's this beautiful little, like when they've got the little brown caps on, which is your baby's about to be born, which is pretty exciting. And you know, if you've got to know what you're actually looking at, because the first time you open a beehive and you have a look at a bee frame, you think, what in the world is this that I'm looking at? And if you've ever wondered, well, here we go. Now, this part of the conversation, I don't think it's terribly important to decide what sort of box you're going to have and what the bees, they've got to live in something. So what's really important before you actually decide which hive you want to buy is to make sure your yard is conducive is to make sure your yard is acceptable for a beehive. Now, don't think that you have to have all the bees foraging material in your backyard, because that's just crazy. They're going to forage like, you wouldn't believe it, but a bee on a nice day will fly more than 5 Ks to its destination and 5 Ks back again to bring the food home. So if you're living in suburbia, I'm pretty sure there's some gum trees and some flowering plants, and goodness knows there's all these cool gardens I drive along. It gets weird as a beekeeper. You drive along and you look at people's gardens and you go, oh, the ladies would enjoy that, I'm sure. So you're not actually considering whether or not you have enough food in your particular yard for the bees. What you're trying to figure out is the fact that the bees, generally when they leave the hive, they'll fly in a straight line. So it's probably not ideal to put your beehive next to your dog kennel. It's probably not ideal to have the beehive right next door to your back door, because, you know, like, kids are going to be walking past there, and you'll probably get in the shit if your kids all start getting stung or the dog dies. Probably not a good way to start. So I think the go is you want to place them towards the back of your yard, somewhere that's not a whole lot of traffic. You know, generally speaking, bees will fly in a straight line, like I said, out of their hive, and they'll go and forage. And if you're worried about the neighbours getting excited, they'll have to fly up and over the fence or over a hedge, and then they're up in the sky and no one would know where they're coming from, so it's a big problem there. And one other thing to consider is the fact that you're not probably moving the hive if you've only got 1 or 2 in your backyard. You want to take a little bit of time to think about the sun and where the sun is going to travel over the sky. I mean, here in the south, in the summertime, our sun's sort of basically straight overhead, and as we get through the winter, the sun's kind of over here. Now, I bring that up because sun's very important to the ladies, because they've actually got to keep their hive at a certain temperature, and so if they don't have to do a lot of work in winter to stay warm, they'll forage more and it's better for them. Conversely, if it's in the middle of summer and they're in the bloody screaming hot, they've got to try and cool the hive down. So if you could find a place that's perhaps under an English tree that loses its leaves in the winter and has a nice foliage in the summer, well, perfect. So there you go. I reckon have a crack. Now, another very important consideration that is sometimes overlooked when you're becoming a beekeeper is where are the ladies going to drink? Now, I realise that a bee is quite small and you would think it wouldn't need a lot of water, but the interesting thing is bees actually use a lot of water in the middle of summer to actually keep their hive cooled down. They're a little bit like the inventor of the evaporative air conditioner. So they get the water from their water source, they fly back to their hive and they spray it across the top of the hive, and then, I don't know, thousands of girls all fan it down, and of course the water evaporates and keeps their babies at the right temperature, which is around about 38 degrees-ish, sort of, give or take a bit. The interesting thing is the bees are not that adept at changing their mind. So if you put your beehive in your yard and they find your neighbour's pool, or the jolly, what was the worst one I heard was the bees were actually feeding out of the chicken drinker, and that was not ideal because that was the chickens in the neighbour's yard and they weren't real happy about the whole deal. So there's only so much neighbour considerations you can buy off with a jar of honey, and especially at first you're not even going to have any honey to bribe them with. So get yourself a water source. The lovely wife has got this water source that has got a bit of algae, and we've got some stuff floating in the bottom that you can't really see in this shot, but make sure the bees don't drown, so you want some corks or some mats or some straw or something along those lines, so as the bees can have something to land on, they can fill up their little tummies with some water and then they can fly back again. So don't just have an open pot where everybody drowns in, otherwise you're like, that's a hell of a waste of time too. Hell, just pops into my mind, it's a good idea where you have to start drinking champagne too. Of course, you don't actually have to have a water fountain. I mean, this is a little bit snazzy, but it was kind of effective and the girls like it because the water's moving. But also, you actually are legally obligated to have a water source. So if the bee people come around, I don't know, maybe the council turns up, and then you can say, look, I've got the water source here and the ladies are feeding and it's, you know, they're doing the right thing. And what's more, you need to consider the fact for every bee that has to go and get water, the further they have to fly, the longer they have to get back to the hive to keep everybody cool, and the less honey they're going to collect. And I think the figure's somewhere around in the height of summer down here in Oz anyway, they'll burn through about 10 litres of water per hive when it's really hot on a hot day. They're not necessarily drinking it, but they're using it to keep their brood the right temperature and their hive the right temperature. So do yourself a favour and get some water source. Save getting in trouble with the council, save your ladies a job, and it's part of beekeeping anyway. Well, when you're commercial beekeeping, you get to blooming cart water thousands of miles on the back of your truck to your ladies to make sure they've got a water source. You know, you've got a tap in your backyard, all you need is a bucket, some floats. Hell, if you got real excited, you can jolly put an automatic filler on your little float machine, but it's good fun going out there filling up the water anyway. I'm fairly confident that if you're anything like the rest of us, you've been shuffling those pieces of paper around on your table, searching the internet, trying to work out which is the best way to go. Well, here you go. So I'm guessing you've made the decision. You're going to bite the bullet. You're in the right place. Coming up next, we're going to show you what the bees want to eat, how they breed, how they multiply, and the other things that you need to consider as a new beekeeper. There's so many things to consider as a new beekeeper. I'm sure you've been wandering around the internet, stewing your head in. Well, you're in the right place. I'm here to save you from all distress. I'm not going to say that everything I say is 100%, because I've been talking to beekeepers for the last 20 years. You get 10 beekeepers in the same room and you'll get 27 different answers, and they'll all argue with each other. But there's a few basic things I can tell you, and then after you get those basics down, then you can go on a little tangent of your own, as long as you get the basics right, which is what we're on about here.